opening my contacts book for the first time to reveal the secrets of what it really takes to be a murder detective.
It sounded like fantasy, but he was telling us the truth.
On the front line, exposing how we solve the most heinous of crimes.
If there's ever a smoking gun scenario, this is it.
Welcome to Secrets of a Murder Detective. The murder of Terry Dado in November 1991 was one of Sussex Police's most challenging cases. I'm going to be meeting the Deputy Senior Investigating Officer to reveal what really happened, the pressures, the challenges, and the techniques they used to bring the killers to justice.
I'm Kevin Moore. I retired as a Detective Chief Superintendent with Sussex Police. This is one of the cases that I will always remember. This was a very unusual case, and in my career, there's only been 2 or 3 other occasions that I've been involved with such a crime.
Kevin, thanks very much for coming in. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Really good to meet you. So Kevin, this case was in 1991. What were you doing back then? What was your role?
I was actually a detective inspector working on division, but I was one of the DIs within the force who was trained to use the whole system, and therefore on numerous murder inquiries I actually performed the role of incident room manager.
So a call came into Sussex Police.
Emergency Reach Service.
When were you first made aware of it? What did you hear?
I was actually contacted during the middle of the night by Brian Foster, who was the detective superintendent who was going to head this investigation, informing me that a man called Terry Dado had been shot dead on his doorstep. Brian asked me to go over to Hastings Police Station to set up the incident room and get the inquiry started. On the drive to Hastings, the things are running through your mind already about the nature of the crime. Clearly this was highly unusual insofar as it involved a shooting in a village, a very quiet village in East Sussex.
What's your understanding of what happened when the police arrived?
There was a 999 call received by Sussex Police from a woman who called herself Jean Dado. She was obviously very distressed. Jean explained that she and Terry had both been upstairs in bed when there had been a knocking at the door, quite loud knocking, persistent knocking. And as a result of that, she told Terry to go down and answer the door. This he did, and she then heard a loud bang, followed by what she said was a second bang. She then went to the banister rail at the top of the stairs, looked over and saw Terry laying flat on his back on the floor, just inside of the front door.
Quite clearly this was a murder. There was no doubt about that. Someone had been shot and killed. What would be the procedure then that would have kicked in?
Detective Superintendent Brian Foster. It was his job to put together a team to investigate the offence.
Well, when I got to the scene, I was given a white outfit so that I could enter the scene so as not to contaminate any parts of the scene. I'm Brian Foster, retired Detective Superintendent. The house itself was a very pleasant-looking cottage, well-furnished, and I made a brief look around the house with forensic officers.
That house is a crime scene, isn't it?
Yes, exactly, yeah.
So one of the first aspects of this scene they would have to deal with is a body. Certain procedures have to take place before a body can be removed.
The retrieval of any potential forensic evidence from the body prior to its removal is critical at that time, because undoubtedly there is always the risk you could lose that if you don't operate speedily in that regard. The body bag is used just in case any other evidence that's on the body drops away and it can be retrieved because it's in a sterile body bag.
The headmaster came in, took us to his office, and he said, "There's been a shooting. We think it's your father. We need to go home." My name's Oliver Dado, and I'm the son of Terry Dado. at that moment, you know, things aren't going to be the same really for a long time, if ever. And then we got home, and obviously Mum was crying, and it was quite difficult because, sorry, can I take a minute?
At the crime scene, after the forensic officers had done what was necessary, Terry's body would be removed to a mortuary.
That's correct. A post-mortem examination took place in respect of Terry Dado, and cause of death was established as being 2 shotgun wounds to the chest, causing massive trauma and resulting in his death.
It was at close range, and this can be clearly judged because a shotgun does spray out the shotgun pellets. If he'd been some distance away, he would have been peppered with pellets, but he may not even have died. So clearly he was close. From that information from the pathologist, there's no question of it being an accident. It was a direct hit, and seemingly quite professionally done.
I seem to remember being asked, do we have an idea of someone who didn't like him or wanted him dead? And we, none of us did. We just had no idea.
When it comes to investigating murders that involve firearms, they will pose a different type of challenge to investigators. Immediately, there's a distance between a victim and the killer. That means there's less likely to be any kind of exchange, potentially on a bullet, potentially on the casings that might be discharged, but it makes it very difficult to find forensic evidence. In this instance, the firearm was established to be a shotgun, and that presents a different scenario to, say, handguns, doesn't it?
Yes, that's very much the case, and indeed rifles. Because a shotgun, all you've got are the pellets that come out of the cartridge, because the cartridge obviously remains inside the weapon. And pellets in one cartridge are pretty much the same as in any other cartridge. The difference is with what we would call a Section 1 firearm, is that if a bullet exits a handgun or a rifle, inevitably there are striation marks left on the bullet as it passes through the barrel. And so therefore, if you recover the bullet, there is a really good opportunity that you can match it with the weapon should you be able to seize it.
And with a shotgun, that's not going to happen, is it?
Exactly. Shotguns are fairly common weapons, particularly in rural settings such as this. And therefore, that makes any search for a particular weapon quite difficult. And inevitably from the scene, not a lot was recovered in terms of evidential value. So this case was never going to be able to be detected through forensic science.
There's a saying in murder investigation: to learn how a person died, you must learn how they lived. It's sometimes referred to as victimology. And that's because most murders, there's something within the victim's lifestyle or somebody who they know that is the link to the murder. And it will be incumbent on the investigation team to try and identify that link. Your priorities would be to get as much information as quickly as possible, because murder investigations are time critical. But you would have had to have balanced that, wouldn't you, with Jean's needs? She's just essentially just witnessed her husband being murdered in front of her. What was she telling you?
We were able to find out that Terry became a bank cashier with Lloyds Bank and then worked his way up subsequently to the role of financial advisor. Terry actually first met Jean in 1985 when Jean had attended his branch of the bank in Tenterden to report her credit cards stolen. They were both married at that time. Jean was married to Alan Blackman, and they had a son called Roger. And Terry had got a wife, and they got 3 sons. But it's fair to say that the relationship developed more than clients and customer. And ultimately, leading up to 1989, both parties divorced their current husband and wife. And Terry and Jean actually went to Gretna Green in Scotland and were married in 1989.
It was when I was round about 12 that he left the house. I got inklings that things weren't necessarily right. We started to see less of him and he wouldn't come home from work as early. I noticed that sort of thing. But Mum never sat us down until he left. So the first time I heard Jean's name mentioned would have been in relation to the fact that she was the likely cause of my mum's divorce. But I never met her, I was never taken round there, I never spoke to her. We did see less of him over time. I think it was under Jean's influence that he stopped paying the mortgage and it caused us financial problems. I got the sense that something was wrong, but I couldn't have put my finger on why.
We established evidentially that in 2 days prior to Terry's murder, a somewhat strange and bizarre advertisement had appeared in something known as the Wealden Advertiser. It's a local free paper, in which Terry had written that all of the rumours and suggestions and claims that people were making, the local gossip that people were having about him and Jean was wholly unsubstantiated. From speaking to Jean, the reason for the advert being posted in the Wealden Advertiser was because for a period of months leading up to that, Jean and Terry had been the subject of local gossip amongst the local community regarding Terry's financial dealings with some of his clients. We found that up until fairly recently, when he had retired, he had advised various very elderly female clients over their investments and the like. And it became apparent from talking to Jean that he had benefited quite massively financially from some of those clients. Indeed, one individual woman, a lady by the name of Anne Burton, had been responsible for giving Terry Daddo £162,000, which had actually paid for Chapel Field Cottage, which is where the murder took place. And what had gone on in the months leading up to the murder was that the family had made various complaints to Lloyds Bank, which had led to the matter being investigated, albeit that the investigation revealed that Terry hadn't actually done anything wrong. Terry and June were anxious to exonerate themselves in the eyes of the local community and therefore decided that this somewhat bizarre advertisement would serve that purpose. What it did lead us to think was that, more clearly, that there was a possibility that his actions had resulted in him being shot.
The deceased had answered the door and he'd been shot. It suggests a planned and professional killing rather than a domestic issue.
Had all the hallmarks of a murder involving a hitman. Jean Daddo, when we obviously posed the obvious question, who may Terry have fallen out with that have caused this, she named a man who was the nephew of Anne Burton. As a result of what Jean had told us, we made some background inquiries, including locating his home address. Officers attended and arrested him on suspicion of Terry Daddo's murder, and he was taken to Hastings Police Station for questioning. Fortunately, from his point of view, he was able to remove himself from the investigation anyway, because ironically, on the night the shooting occurred, he had been out socialising and drinking with a man who was ironically a former retired Kent Assistant Chief Constable. So you don't get a much better alibi than that. He obviously had a cast iron alibi and was therefore not involved in the shooting of Terry.
So as a family, you go from thinking maybe we can start to get some, if not closure, at least certainty about what happened, which is the start of the journey, But you go quite quickly from that back to, okay, who did this? So the net of suspects is gradually getting smaller and smaller.
The investigation wasn't going very fast or very far. We were stuck in terms of no obvious choice of suspect. Clearly, there were some financial issues that were very strange, and we just had to find who disliked Terry Dado that much that they will be prepared to kill him.
We didn't spend too much time, as I remember, gossiping or speculating. We were as confused as everyone else.
When a murder occurs in a particular area, police are going to start knocking on doors. It's known as house-to-house inquiries. A strategy will be put in place which will consider which doors are going to be knocked on, which questions are going to be asked, and whether or not descriptions are going to be taken.
House-to-house inquiries, they are vital in all investigations such as this. And they have to be done properly, accurately, recorded properly. And it's incredible the amount of information you get as a result of those inquiries.
In this case, what we were looking for was, had anybody been seen in the area leading up until the time of Terry Dado's death? Had there been any suspicious incidents leading up to the time of Terry Dado's death? It was during the course of this questioning that the name of Adam, the Badger Man as we refer to him ultimately, came up. Because more than one person was seen on house to house.
What were they saying about Adam?
Well, they said that they'd either seen him very close to Chapelfield Cottage, or they had that they'd actually stopped him and asked him what he was doing, and that's when he had explained to them that he was this badger enthusiast who was looking to preserve badgers and therefore looking to move them from their current sets where building work was going to take place.
I suppose in a small village like that, people are going to stand out if they're not local.
Absolutely, yeah.
And the fact the residents there were stopping and speak to him, he must have been on their radar, and he must
Absolutely,
have been
yeah.
suspicious to them.
We also got quite a bit of information which you might regard as gossip, but it was information about Mr. and Mrs. Dado, how they were viewed in the village, and information about exactly how they lived their life. Mr. and Mrs. Dado were seen as a bit of a strange couple. It seemed that they didn't get on that well.
People would be going out and bringing back this information and sharing it amongst the team. You must very quickly be starting to build up a picture of there's something within Terry's life and his relationship that isn't quite right. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We then got some information to suggest that Jean was fed up with Terry in many respects, and the marriage was turning sour. So when you start to put all of that together, you start to think to yourself, well, perhaps there's more to this than meets the eye. And then you start to look a little bit closer to home, perhaps. So you then start to look at the financial aspects to their lives. Several weeks before Terry's death, his will had been changed to the extent where Teresa, Terry's first wife, and his sons were basically written out of the will, and all of the benefits would go to Jean. So the timings of these matters I think, were fairly significant.
What amount of money did Jean Dado stand to inherit as a result of Terry's death?
Well, what we were able to establish financially was that there was around £300,000 in savings. Plus, of course, there was the value of the house itself.
So she was going to benefit greatly from her husband's death?
Absolutely.
It made us think very clearly that there's something very suspicious going on.
Media appeals are a very important part of any murder investigation, and a great deal of thought will go into them. They have three main purposes. The first of which is to inform. It's to make sure that people know that a particular crime has taken place. Secondly, it's to appeal for information. And thirdly, it's to reassure. It's to make sure the public know that all is being done to catch the killer. One of the tools that is open to a police investigation, and is probably the most emotive part of any sort of press appeal, is to get the family involved. And that is something that you chose to do, isn't it?
Well, in terms of the media, yes, we did. And it was slightly tactical in many respects because we didn't hold a press conference until in early January. So by that time, the investigation was over a month old. And Jean appeared at that press conference. And there was the rationale for that was very simple. Obviously, there was an appeal for witnesses and information, but also it was to see how Jean reacted in the context of that press conference.
I would just like to say, anybody out there knows anything or has seen anything that could help find whoever shot my husband, would please come forward.
When a family has lost somebody, to put themselves into the position of doing a public appeal is enormously stressful, enormously traumatic, enormously upsetting. And that emotion is often palpable in these appeals. I'm Dr. Donna Youngs. I'm an investigative psychologist, which means I use psychology to help the police.
I think without exception, those that saw it thought, well, this doesn't seem to be a woman who, even though it's only just over a month after her husband has been shot dead on the doorstep, and she's not exactly forthcoming in terms of appealing for information and evidence.
Anybody out there knows anything or has seen anything that could help find whoever shot my husband.
Human beings are very good at recognising faked emotion, and there's something about Jean's public appeal which just doesn't ring true.
No new leads emerged from the press conference itself, and the focus therefore returned to looking at the financial affairs of Terry and Jean. And what we were able to find out was that, bizarrely, £12,000 in cash had been withdrawn from the joint account and had been kept at home.
When she was asked what she did with that, she claimed that she put it in a box and strangely enough, put it up the chimney breast in the lounge. And when we asked, well, is it still there? She indicated that, yes, it was. So, in fact, I was in the house and we searched the chimney breast, and sure enough, we found a shoebox, but there was no money in it. At which stage Mrs. Dado accused me and everyone else involved of stealing her money. 9 times out of 10, the murderer is known to the victim. So we really need to hone in on who knows the Dados and could be possibly responsible for this killing.
So it inevitably led us to look more closely, I suppose, at Jean herself and indeed her son, Roger Blackman, from her first marriage. Roger had an inbuilt dislike of Terry for the fact that Terry has been responsible for the breakup of his parents' marriage.
We heard from his girlfriend how much he hated Terry Dado, and there was even discussion, according to her, that it would be good to get rid of Terry Dado. So he was very much on our radar, and we were looking at all his associates to see whether or not we could find more information about him.
What we were able to find was that he was a fairly significant middle-tier drug dealer, and we got this from a number of sources. And we found out from this that one of the individuals that he had supplied was a man called Robert Bell. Now, Robert Bell's middle name was Adam, and when we looked at him and his name was put into the system, it identified the fact that a man calling himself Adam had seen local people in the vicinity. So some local people had mentioned that and had described this happening on their house-to-house forms when that was done. So all of that had been fed into the computer, and of course, as soon as we found out that Robert Adam Bell was an associate of Roger Blackman, the fact that Adam had been a name that had been used by this individual in that area was very significant.
Robert Bell was a very strange character, a bit of a Walter Mitty, ex-military, and we clearly wanted to interview him. We spoke to his wife, and she gave us information about Roger and their association, and she didn't like Roger at all, and she had overheard discussions between them, but she was not prepared to make a statement. As a wife, we couldn't make her give evidence against her husband, and at that stage it was becoming clear that Roger and Robert were up to something.
So now your inquiry is now moving on. You've got 3 people that are on your radar, if you like. Jean Dado, Roger Blackman, Robert Bell.
That's correct, yeah.
The trio here is really interesting because we've got 3 very different driving narratives intersecting. So we've got Jean, who is motivated by power, and for her, money represents power. Then we've got Roger, who has this angry, avenging narrative. And then we've got Robert, the trained military man with a drugs problem.
So a decision was taken that the 3 of them would all be arrested on suspicion of the murder and conspiracy to murder of Terry Dado. Unfortunately for us, on the morning that we did this, we were able to arrest Jean Dado and her son Roger Blackman, but we were unable to arrest Robert Bell because it transpired shortly after Terry's death, Robert Bell had decided to go to America, packed his things and gone. Now, to some extent, that was exceedingly frustrating from our point of view because we really wanted all 3 in together at the same time. But I suppose, looking at it from the other side of the coin, well, why has Robert Bell suddenly decided a few days after Terry's death that he's going to disappear?
Jean had done such a good job of playing the grieving widow that to be told she'd then been arrested, you're left to then piece together their relationship and what on earth has gone on here. You're still confused as to why someone would go on TV asking for witnesses to a murder that they'd committed, so you're trying to get your head around many things which don't add up.
We were then starting to build another hypothesis that possibly Jean, Roger Blackman and Robert Bell had conspired together, and possibly that Robert Bell may have even been the person who was responsible for the shooting itself of Terry Dado.
An important stage of any murder investigation where somebody's being arrested is their interview. What you're hoping for is them to commit to a story, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So in custody, Jean Dado was interviewed by 2 of your officers. What did she tell them?
Well, she pretty much stuck to her story, and at no time did she offer any suggestion that she was involved in Terry's murder. We did put the things to her about the fact that we thought she was instrumental in setting up Terry's killing. Obviously, we weren't in a position where we could corroborate that in any other way. Without Robert Bell being present and being able to be interviewed, we were stuck really because we'd only got the 2 of the 3.
What did Roger Blackman tell you in?
Well, Roger Blackman offered up the fact he didn't like Terry, and he saw him wholly responsible for the breakup of his mother and father's marriage. So therefore, his attitude was, well, I'll admit that there's no love lost, but I'm not involved in his death. Following questioning Jean and Roger, there was insufficient evidence at that stage to formulate any form of charges, and therefore both Jean and Roger were released on bail because we desperately needed at the same time to be able to interview Robert Bell. We felt, because of his military background, he had been a lance corporal in the military previously. He also owed Roger Blackman several £1,000s for drugs that Roger had supplied to him. Roger could well have been blackmailing Bell over the money and getting him to orchestrate the killing of Terry Dado to pay off that debt, or help to pay off that debt. From this point onwards, a lot of our time was spent trying to trace and get hold of Robert Bell and try to convince him to return to the UK. It would be fair to say that this was a bit of a frustrating time at this point of the investigation, because clearly we were unable to proceed further without being able to interview Robert Bell. Fortunately, it didn't last for that long, because within a week or two, we were contacted by Robert Bell's wife to say, in fact, he had returned.
He went to Robert Bell's house. He wasn't immediately in the vicinity, but he was nearby, and we were able to arrest him. And his wife was very upset. We left officers with his wife, and she then told us a story of what she had seen on the night of the murder, in that her husband, Robert, had come home in a state, and a little later, Roger Blackman had come to the home, and he paid Robert some money, several £1,000s, and she was convinced that something bad had happened.
When police investigate a murder, they don't actually have to prove somebody's motive when they go to court. That's not one of the points they have to establish. But understanding why someone chose to take another person's life is important, none more so than for a jury. If someone's going to convict someone of a murder, it makes it much easier to make that decision if you can understand why someone committed that murder. You go track down Robert Bell, and he's now under arrest.
And then we arrest the other two.
So now you've got all three in custody.
Yeah. This is obviously was a significant step forward, because we had all three suspects in custody at the same time, and we were able to interview them and gain their various accounts, and then see where any discrepancies lie in relation to those accounts given.
So what did Robert Bell tell you during the interview?
Well, Robert Bell was interesting because he virtually told us the story as we knew it, even implicating himself insofar as being the Adam, the Badger Man, and saying he had been approached by Roger Blackman to carry out the killing of Terry Dado, and the fact that he had been offered £12,000 to do that, and the clearance of his drug debt, where he owed Roger Blackman several £1,000s. The sum of £12,000 being mentioned was obviously hugely significant, because we knew that literally a matter of weeks prior to Terry's death, Jean had withdrawn £12,000 in cash. He actually put himself at the scene on numerous occasions where he was in possession of the shotgun, but on each occasion that he went there, he actually bottled it and didn't do it, didn't carry out the deed. His argument was I didn't fire the fatal shot because at the end of the day I bottled it, and I think it was Roger Blackman that actually did it in the end. Bell also told us that it was that the whole hit aspect was planned and created by Jean in an effort to get rid of Terry and to benefit financially from his death.
And there was another occasion where Robert told us Terry and Jean had gone down to Devon for a holiday, and they stayed in a guest house. And Jean had written on a small card which advertised the guest house and sent it to Robert Bell. And on the back she had written, "This is where we are, come down and kill Terry now," or words to that effect. So he did in fact travel down there, and on the way he purchased a crossbow, and but when he got there he didn't get the opportunity, seemingly. And we were able to trace where in fact he had purchased the crossbow. It sounded like fantasy, but he was telling us the truth. But he said, "I was never going to really do it, I was just going along with them." The people who lived there and ran the guest house had moved to France, and it was important, we felt, to get a copy of the card where they advertised their property. And so we contacted the French police and asked them to see whether or not they still had any.
So your jigsaw was starting to take shape, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's manna from heaven for us, because this was the missing link that we had been looking for. And of course, even in our wildest dreams, we didn't really think he was going to come across when he did come back and say all of this.
It's quite a point for a murder investigator, isn't it, to go to the Crown Prosecution Service?
When you get the final nod from them to say, yeah, go ahead and charge conspiracy with all three, and both Robert Bell and Roger Blackman with the murder itself, clearly it's almost like a huge weight's lifted off your shoulders, that actually there's a good chance of securing a conviction here based on the evidence you've managed to gather. Then yes, you're very pleased about that.
When somebody's charged with an offence, the police have to make a decision whether they keep them in custody to take them before a magistrate's court, or they bail them out and they go there of their own volition. Murder's slightly different, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and always has been, because in a case of murder, there's a presumption initially of no bail, and therefore the magistrate's court on this occasion remanded all three into custody.
So eventually you reach the point that you've all been working towards. Everything a murder investigation is to get to the point of a trial. All your work is focused on the trial, and you're there as a team.
Yeah, that's correct. They appeared at Hove Crown Court in 1993, and there was an 8-week trial.
We sat in the public gallery and we turned up to days when the police advised us to go.
So during the trial, what evidence came out from the defence?
Well, each of the defendants still maintained their innocence of the act itself. Jean Dado stuck to her guns and basically said she was not involved in any form of conspiracy to murder her husband.
The guest house inquiry and the card on which Jean was alleged to have written on the back of to indicate to Robert where he could go down and kill Terry Dado was quite important at the trial, because whilst Jean was actually in the box giving evidence, it's incredible to say, but I received the card from France at that time. She was actually in the box. Somebody delivered it to me at the court. I rushed it to our barrister, Camden Pratt, and he presented it to Jean while she was giving evidence in the box. And the piece of theatre was that she immediately turned the card over to see if it was the same card that she'd written on. You could almost hear the jury gasp.
She didn't come across as very credible to me, and never once showed any remorse that I saw. When it came out that she'd waited 15 minutes between the shooting taking place, which is obviously witnesses hearing the gunshot and so on, and her calling the ambulance, that's the moment at which you think, if there's ever a smoking gun scenario, this is it.
Roger Blackman said that whilst he detested and loathed Terry Daddo, he didn't have any involvement in his death. Robert Bell, of course, was significantly different.
And Robert told us the whole story, which in many respects was quite incredible, in that he had made several attempts to kill Terry, but that he never intended to do it. He said that one of the attempts on Terry's life was through drugs. They were going to poison him. He also said that on one occasion, the back door was left open for him to enter the house, and he was going to bludgeon Terry Daddo to death with a baseball bat or something similar. But he got halfway up the stairs and was disturbed and ran away.
Robert Bell was just appalling. He was hopelessly out of his depth. He looked like a broken man, to be honest. The piece of information which really started to make us wonder what on earth had been going on was the revelation that this wasn't just a one-off or a spur-of-the-moment argument. The fact that this was the latest in a series of 6, 7, or 8 attempts to kill him. It was pretty remarkable. You start to see how calculated the whole thing was.
And I certainly felt a little relieved that we've just about come to the end of this case. We've done all we can. The matter now is with the jury, and we just hope that they come to the right conclusion.
What did they come back? What was their findings?
It was a unanimous decision. All 3 defendants were found guilty of conspiracy to murder, and Robert Bell was found guilty of the murder of Terry Daddo itself. At the conclusion of the case, none of the 3 showed any form of remorse whatsoever for Terry's death. The judge gave Robert Bell 18 years for conspiracy to murder, together with a 15-year sentence for the murder to run concurrently. Jean Daddo was given 18 years imprisonment for conspiracy to murder, as indeed was her son, Roger Blackman.
You expect at some point she might show emotion, or she managed to show emotion, fake emotion for the cameras for the appeal, but she couldn't show any genuine emotion. When she was sentenced, I think she just got turned around, led away. Same with the others, and that's the last I've ever seen of her.
In terms of an investigation, this wasn't a simple one. You didn't have DNA, you didn't have fingerprints, and in 1991 you couldn't avail yourself of mobile phone usage, which plays a central part in most modern murder investigations. What you had to do was rely on good old groundwork, detective work, getting out there and finding the evidence yourself.
In a way, I felt sorry for Robert Bell because he got involved with a couple of quite evil persons. He didn't want to do it, I don't think, and eventually he was persuaded, pressured or frightened into it, and he did it. In contrast, Jean and Roger clearly were the evil minds behind this death, and between them they got their heads together to commit this awful crime.
It would be fair to say that at the end of the trial, we were, as an investigation team, we were duly satisfied. It had been a fairly long and protracted and difficult investigation in many respects.
There is a great satisfaction in doing a job properly. We would refer to it as taking bad people off the street. It is helping society. It is important.
In my opinion, the 3 defendants were totally callous in their actions. They took away the life of an individual in a way that was totally violent and shocking.
In some ways, he had everything with us, and then he'd wanted more, which I know can happen. I don't blame him. He made a bad decision. No one's perfect, but no one deserves that to happen to them.
It was a dreadful murder, and those that have been put away deserved every year they got.
It's like it's always in the back of your mind at some moments. Things you hear may trigger a memory of him. So there are things that we do to try to remember fondly the good bits about him. To not get a chance to say goodbye is pretty awful. From a family point of view, it's pretty awful.
When I was speaking with Kevin Moore, I got a sense of the real determination he and his team had in catching the killers of Terry Daddo. So I can only imagine how satisfying it was to eventually have got the result that they did. I have the utmost respect for the detectives that investigated Terry Daddo's murder. Without the tools that I had available to me, they used their dogged determination, their gut instinct to bring these killers to justice.